you, Asawa, very much, and it's great to be here. We had a long workshop this afternoon, so I ask your indulgence if you're there this afternoon because I feel compelled to share my story. Is that all right? Okay. So just recently finished a tour about a year ago on a book called God, A Story of Revelation. And it's about 10 chapters, 10 stories. Starts with the Old Testament, with the story of Job. As you know, he's the man who does everything right and yet suffers. So we still ask that question, why is there so much suffering? And I'm just looking at the clock because I want to be respectful of the time. So can somebody mind the clock? I can't see it. It's 7:30 there? Okay. So 40 minutes, huh? The book starts with the revelations of 10 people. It starts with Job. It ends with Einstein and Tagore. And the reason I wrote the book was I accidentally found one of those Google searches, an article in the New York Times when the Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore met Einstein in 1930 in a city called Potsdam in Germany. It was a very interesting conversation because, you know, if we go to these science conferences, you hear this constant argument between what is called realism and idealism. Einstein was a realist, which basically means that in the philosophy of science and consciousness, a realist is a scientist who believes that the world exists independent of whether we are there or not. Yeah, everybody's familiar with Einstein's famous statement, the moon would still be there if I was not looking at it. So this is a very interesting conversation which got lost in the zeitgeist of pre-war Germany and Hitler and all that. Because at the end of the conversation, it's clear that Tagore has implanted the seed of doubt in Einstein's mind. Anyway, I wrote the story because of that, and I went through the country talking about the history of God as human beings have understood it. There was only one other inspiration that I had, which about for this book was a 1980 lecture of Krishnamurti, where he was giving this lecture in Madison Square Garden to about 8,000 people at the Feld Forum. And there was a Christian fundamentalist sitting in the front row, and he got up and he said, you know, the more I listen to you, he's saying to Krishnamurti, he says, the more convinced I become that you're an atheist. And Krishnamurti scratched his head for a moment, and then he said, I used to be an atheist till I realized I was God. Of course, this shocked this guy. He said, are you denying the divinity of Jesus Christ? And Krishnamurti responded, I never denied anybody their divinity. So great times those days. So I landed in Los Angeles and was picked up by my son, Gautam, and his 5-year-old, then 5-year-old. He's close to 6 recently. And so as we are getting out of the airport, he looks at me and he says, Dada, which is the Hindi word for father on the father's side, grandfather on the father. He says, Dada, what is dark energy? He's not yet 5. So I said, what do you know about dark energy? And he said, it flows through the night sky. Very poetic, very beautiful. As we stepped out of the airport and got into the car, we were driving past the ocean in Santa Monica. I rolled down the window, and he looks out of the window. Remember, this kid is not yet 5. And he looks at me, he says, how did they make the ocean? I said, who make the ocean? He said, they. I said, no, you've got to tell me, what do you mean by they? So he thought for a minute, and then he reformulated the question. He says, how did the ocean get made? So I said, well, the ocean got made the way the Earth got made. It's a piece of rock that fell off a big star, and there are now, several of these, and we call it the solar system. Do you know how many planets there are in the solar system? He said, well, if you count Pluto, there are 9. But if you don't count Pluto, there are 8. I said, that's pretty good. And where did the solar system come from? He says, from the galaxy. I said, yeah. What galaxy? He says, a Milky Way galaxy? I said, yes. I said, and where did the galaxy come from? He said, all the other galaxies? I said, yeah. Where did they come from? And he said, from the universe? I said, true. And then I asked them the final question, where did the universe come from? And without batting an eyelid, he said, from another dimension. So I'm saying to myself, this is 30 years of work, and this five-year-old kid summarized it all. So of course, being from India, I'm thinking, who's reincarnating here? So I said, Krishu, how do you know all this? He says, it's on my Pokemon. So the point of the story is, this is the collective conversation right now amongst elite 5-year-olds. And if you're not up to speed with Pokemon, then you're out of the conversation. It's a very relevant story for precisely what Maurizio and you were saying earlier, and that is the two fundamental questions in science today, the two open questions. You can Google this, go to the year 2008 and look up science, open questions. The first is, what's the universe? What is the universe? What's the stuff of the universe? And I say open because the answer is we don't know. And the second is, what's consciousness? And again, in the same issue of science, open questions in science, what is consciousness? Answer is we don't know, scientifically. No idea what the universe is, and no idea what consciousness is. Are the two connected? Because I think Maurizio said we can't be certain of anything, but I think we can be certain that we experience something called the universe, right? Whatever it is, we experience it. So we know it exists. And the second thing we know is that we exist, even though we may not know who we are. So there is existence, and there's awareness of existence, right? Existence, awareness of existence. And both these seemingly are open questions in science. What is existence? Don't know. What is awareness of existence? Don't know. And the reason is as follows. As my 5-year-old grandson said, 70% of the universe is today supposed to be dark energy. And, I'm going to be inviting Menas to talk, so I won't, talk a lot about this, but dark energy is this mysterious force which Einstein called the cosmological constant, which is expanding the universe faster than the speed of light. And as the galaxies move each further away from each other, the speed of the movement of galaxies from each other expands. So the more space is ripped apart, the speed of the galaxies expands. So the cosmic horizon is now 47 billion light years away from where we are. And out there, at the edge of outer space, 47 billion light years away from where we are, galaxies are tumbling into the unknowable faster than the speed of light. Unknowable, because by the time light comes from there to here, our galaxy will have burnt itself up into the heat death of absolute zero. Won't exist. 25% of the universe is what is called dark matter. it's called dark matter because it's the scaffolding of an entire galaxy. So the Milky Way galaxy is held together as a unit, separate from next door, Andromeda, and next door, Virgo, and so on. These galaxies are held together as units that revolve with this mysterious thing called dark matter. It's invisible matter because it's not atomic. It does not reflect light, emit light, absorb light. So there's no way of interacting with it. Even our best scientific instruments, which are extensions of our senses, can't interact with it because it's not atomic. And that's about 25, 26%. So that's 96% of the universe that is either unknown or unknowable. Leaves 4% of the universe, which is atomic. Most of it, 99.9%, is hydrogen and helium, which hasn't yet formed into stars. And that leaves about 0.1%, which is the visible universe. But 99% of the 0.1% is invisible interstellar dust. Okay, so the visible universe, which hundreds of thousands of galaxies, each galaxy, billions and billions and billions and billions, as Carl Sagan would say, billions, and add another billion, the entire universe with billions of galaxies. And I'm now told by astrophysicists, 300 million planets in our new planets in our own galaxy. And then, of course, all these other galaxies. All of that is 0.01% of what's there. 0.01%. That's atomic. And you and I made up of that, and we depend on it to be here. If the gravitational forces of the dark energies, galaxies would collapse, we wouldn't be here, because the galaxy wouldn't be held together by the gravitational force. So we are held together, we are having this conversation because of this mysterious, unknowable substance, which we can't even call a substance because we don't know what it is. And then we come to the 0.01% that is atomic. Well, as you'll hear later, atoms are particles, and particles are waves, and waves are possibilities. And where do these possibilities exist? In nothing. So as we go beyond the appearance of molecules and enter subatomic clouds, and then go beyond the clouds, what's left is nothing. So the best answer, what's the nature of the universe, is it's nothing. What about consciousness? And that's the second thing, okay? And where is consciousness? People look for consciousness. You just heard, Maurizio said, look for it in the brain. Look for the observing self. In every observation, we presume that there's an observing self. I'm observing you right now. You're observing me. And we both presume that there's somebody here who's doing the observation. Well, go inside the body. Look inside the brain with PET scans and CAT scans and everything that you can. And look every nook and cranny of every neural network that you can find. Go past every ghost-filled attic and every dark alley in a neural network. There's no observing self. It can't be found. So people say, well, we have a soul. Where is it? Okay. Where is the soul? Where is this observing self who not only observes but thinks, feels, imagines, has intuition, intention, creativity, choice? All this stuff we are doing, who's doing it, can't be found. Which leads you to only one of two conclusions. It's a hallucination produced by a biological robot, which is Daniel Dennett's basically contention that there's no observing self. It's a hallucination, what did you say, illusion produced by, as I said, a biological robot, But if you agree that the observing self is an illusion, then you must also agree that that which is observed is also an illusion, because the illusion is producing the illusion. Right? So right now, as you're listening to me, please turn your attention to who's listening. As you're listening to me, be aware of who's listening. If you feel a presence, that's the observing self. And spiritual traditions at least say, it's been there all along. It's not in space-time. It's not your mind, which might be saying, I wish I hadn't had the dessert, or I wish I'd gone to the bathroom before. Whatever, the conversation is in the presence of an awareness. That awareness was there when you were a single cell. You know, when you started life as a single cell, before you multiplied yourself about 50 times, only 50 replications to create the 100 trillion cells, which is more than all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. One became many. But that self was there in that cell. It was alive, it was aware, it was present. And you did not have a brain or a body at that time. And yet, it self-regulated itself, differentiated itself, speeded up its division, slowed it down, became eyes and nose and hair follicles and genitalia and brain. So the brain came much later. And that observing self was there prior to conception, when sperm met ovum, and it was there before that. That observing self has experienced all our ancestors, your parents and their parents. And I was in the workshop, I was telling our audience that recently I was with Thich Nhat Hanh, and he was doing calligraphy, and he just was drawing a circle. And he said, I invite my mother to draw this circle. I invite my father to draw this circle. I invite my parents and their parents and my ancestors to draw this circle. And I realized, I called Rudy up immediately after the experience, because as I was watching Thich Nhat Hanh doing this, the idea came to me that, you know, every action that we do, like I'm moving my hands, I'm speaking to you, this requires my neural networks to fire, which requires electrochemical activity, which requires DNA and RNA to translate. That means I'm activating my genes with every experience, and we can go through this when Rudy's here in more detail. But my ancestors and their ancestors, human, animal, microbial, are alive right now as the genetic activity in every cell of my body. If I wasn't right now getting the help of all my ancestors, going back to the first living organisms on the rims of volcanoes 3.8 billion years ago, called chemolithoautotrophic hyperthermophiles, they're right here. Rudy will tell you that 65% of our genes are the same as a banana. Okay? 80% are the same as a monkey. Okay, 99 almost percent is the same as a chimpanzee. They're all alive right now in every cell of my body. This is the mystery of the continuity of life, if we say life is awareness. Where is it? What is it? How is it produced? And science will tell you, we don't know. So the two most fundamental questions of existence, what is existence and what is awareness of existence, we don't have the answers. Okay. So today what I'd like to do is see what are the attempts at these answers in previous generations, particularly in the wisdom traditions of the East, Vedanta, Kashmir Shaivism, Buddhism, etc. And for that we need to first define our terms. What is consciousness? So consciousness is variously defined as subjectivity, awareness. You are aware of me, you're aware of your body, you're aware of your mind. And this is what gives you selfhood, and it also gives you control of your mind. And this is, in Vedanta, the potential for all experience. Once experience starts, then you get into perception and cognition and everything else. But even before you have the experience, there is a fundamental ground of being, and this ground of being or existence is prior to subject-object split. Once experience occurs, then there's a subject-object split. So as soon as you're having a perceptual experience, a cognitive experience, personal interaction, look at the universe, you're already in the subject-object split. So fundamental awareness or consciousness or pure consciousness is non-symbolic. And everything else, once the subject-object split starts, then everything else is a symbolic representation of that. And this is what Vedanta says. This is the subjective ground of all experience. And the Sanskrit term for this is Sat Chit Ananda. Sat means truth. Chit means knowing. It knows. It's aware. Ananda, a state of eternal bliss. So that's at least how I think we'll all agree to some version of this definition of consciousness. And we can say that science, on the other hand, is a very systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. Science is based on a loop of observation, theory, experimentation, and validation. It's based on facts. It's based on empirical measurements, quantification, usually in terms of units of mass and energy, velocity and position. Science is what we call objective truth. Now, while this is the traditional definition of science, I have a few problems with science as revealing truth to us. I think it's very clear that science is the experience of what we call perceptual reality. And perceptual reality is not really fundamental reality. It's a species-specific description of a mode of observation. Supposing there's an insect looking at me, and the insect has 100 eyes, then the insect is not going to see the same thing that you and I experience as reality. A honeybee navigates through ultraviolet, a snake through infrared, a chameleon's eyeballs swivel on two different axes. You can't even remotely imagine what this room would look like to a chameleon. A bat sees the world through the echo of ultrasound. So perceptual experience is a species-specific, culture-specific mode of observation. What we call empirical facts are not fundamental things, but descriptions of modes of observation. And already, because science is based on a subject-object split, you can say science is fragmented truth. Science says there's an observer, never mind where the observer is. Ask, all these scientists, they kind of ridicule out-of-body experiences. We should ask them, how do we get an in-body experience without being in the body? That's the real mystery. There's no one there, and yet you feel there's someone there. Okay? So either it's a hallucination or it's not in space-time. Those are the only two explanations. But science ignores the observer is the elephant in the room. We don't acknowledge its presence, and yet where are theories conceived? In consciousness. Where are experiments designed? In consciousness. Where are observations made? In consciousness. So science has already divided the world into subject and object, when in fact the observer is an activity of the universe. You're not an observer, but you're an activity of the universe. And being based on objective measurement, Science finds itself in a dilemma because consciousness cannot be directly observed or measured. In Vedanta they say, if you can see it, if you can measure it, if you can touch it, taste it, smell it, hear it, it doesn't exist. Okay? What exists is that without which you cannot experience touch or sight or taste or smell, that with which you cannot imagine or think. That is real. The rest is a quantification of that. And so this is always the dilemma for science. So consciousness cannot be observed because it's always the observer. It cannot be measured because it's doing the measuring. And any scientific validation of consciousness that we have, whether we are looking inside the brain with a PET scan or looking at molecules in the brain or neural networks, any of that is inferential. The only way to have a direct experience of consciousness is through self-awareness. But I asked you to be aware of yourself, and there you are. Okay? The only way that consciousness can be known is by consciousness. And spirituality is that progressive journey into self-awareness. It's the only valid way of understanding what is fundamental reality and experiencing consciousness directly. Here are some of the myths I think we should dispel about science, because, your conference is called Science and Non-Duality. Right there is the paradox, right? Non-duality is not scientifically proved and achievable. So science is based on the observation of facts and measurements, and there's the assumption of many scientists that it is the most reliable way of knowing the truth. This is a metaphysical assumption. Say, there's an observer-independent reality. Well, prove it. Ask the scientist to do exactly what the scientist tells you to do. Prove an observer-independent reality. How do you do that? You can't even conceive of an observer-independent reality because conceptions are conceived in your awareness. Description of empirical facts are, as actually I said, modes of human perception using a human nervous system to questions humans ask of themselves. So all science does is models reality. It is not reality, it is modeling reality. It's a map of reality. Here's some famous people who said the same thing much more elegantly. Heisenberg, when he says, what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. Or John Wheeler, every particle, every field of force, even the space-time continuum itself derives its function, its meaning, its very existence entirely from apparatus-elicited concepts to question we ask. A participatory universe. And observations, as I said, theories, and the whole loop of observation, experimentation, validation is in consciousness. So science is a product, an offspring of consciousness. And then we go here trying to say, how can we scientifically validate consciousness when science itself is the product of consciousness? So this was the great conversation in 1930, reported in the New York Times. I won't go into details of it right now. It was a fascinating conversation. Tagore says, what we call truth lies in the rational harmony between the subjective and objective aspects of reality, both of which belong to the super-personal human being. Einstein, he says, we do things with our mind, even in our everyday life, for which we are not responsible. The mind acknowledges realities outside of it, independent of it. For instance, nobody may be in this house, yet the table remains where it is. And Tagore says, yes, it remains outside the individual mind, but not outside the universal mind. Okay. To which Einstein says, if nobody were in the house, the table would exist all the same. But this is already illegitimate from your point of view, because we cannot explain what it means that the table is there independently of us. Our natural point of view, because we cannot explain what it means that the table is there independently of us. It's a belief which nobody can lack, not even primitive beings. We attribute to truth a superhuman objectivity. It is indispensable for us, this reality, which is independent of our existence and our experience and our mind, through which we cannot say what it means. And to go, this is a long conversation which I just shortened here as a preface, because in the end Einstein conceives. He says, I'm more religious than you are. It's a very interesting conversation, because you say, there are so many theories of quantum physics today. It's not just the Copenhagen and the modified Copenhagen and the transactional, the decoherence. But even these theories are all conceived in human consciousness, and so you can't get rid of it. So once again, the deeper truth, the most fundamental scientific fact, is not the existence of the universe, but the awareness of that universe. Existence and awareness are inseparable. Existence and awareness of existence are inseparable. This is the true meaning of what reality is. And if there is a relationship between quantum mechanics and consciousness, again we get into arguments about observer effect, John von Neumann, the other theorists. I don't want to go into all these. We have an expert here in the Copenhagen interpretation and the many worlds theories and so on. But leaving them aside, the perspective from Vedanta is very simple. The universe exists in the subject. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna speaking to Arjuna says, Prakratim swam vashtabhai vishrajami puna puna. Curving back within myself, I create again and again. I create the mind, I create the body, I create the senses, and I create the universe. And it is experienced qualitatively in me as sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. And based on this, Benas, I, Rudy, have written a series of articles on qualia mechanics, which we think is the next frontier, understanding the universe not through its measurement, but through its experiences. You don't experience photons, you don't experience the Higgs boson, you don't experience quarks, you don't experience any of those things. In fact, no scientist has ever seen a subatomic particle. And, we look at their trails, their ghostly trails, after huge, expensive experiments in hadron colliders, and we say they're things. But there's no such thing as a particle. It's a space-time event in consciousness. And every act of perception is like taking a photo. And the photo is not the reality. If I took your photo and said, this is you, you'd say, no, that's my photo and not a good one. Okay, take another picture. Okay. And then we don't like the photo, then we tear it up. But whatever, if I went to the ocean just now and took a photo and brought it to you and said, look at this beautiful wave, look at this buzzard, look at the rainbow, and you said, let's go look at this, and we went there, it's not there. We took a snapshot. And every act of perception is a snapshot of an ineffable, moving, mysterious field of possibilities, a consciousness field. And you cannot grasp it, because the one who's grasping does not exist. And that which is grasped at does not exist either. So this was what, the Buddha said. He was a really smart guy, by the way. I mean, way ahead of everything today. His three dharma seals. Impermanence in time is non-self nature of object. There is no cause-effect. Everything interdependently co-arises. We are interbeings in the inter-isness, and that is all there is. You've heard of the famous lecture of the Buddha when he holds the rose in his hand and Ananda smiles and everybody goes to Ananda and says, what did you see? We saw a rose. And Ananda says, I saw the rose, but I also saw rainbows and sunshine and earth and water and wind and air. I saw the infinite void, and I saw the whole universe pretending to be a flower. A snapshot of the universe as that flower. And they say, I went beyond that and I saw the infinite being. And I saw that there's no personal self in that flower. There's only the universal self everywhere I look. Impermanence in time is non-self nature of objects, where in the interbeingness there is the inter-arising, the emergence of complexity, all happening all at once, the whole universe evolving around the still point of the present moment. What brilliance. And then from that, he said his four noble truths. There is suffering, there are causes for suffering, there's a way out, and the only way out is the Eightfold Path to enlightenment. Of course, if you go back behind Buddha's teaching, was the Vedanta, which says the five kleshas, the five causes of human suffering, not knowing the true nature of reality, number one. Number two, grasping and clinging at what doesn't exist. Number three, recoiling from what doesn't exist. Number four, identification with the ego, a socially induced hallucination. And number five, the fear of death. And the Vedanta goes on to say, there is a way out. And the way out is find out what is real. And what is real is consciousness and its contents, period. The whole universe is consciousness and its contents. The qualia that are forms of consciousness within consciousness. The I feeling, which is the qualia, the form of consciousness within consciousness. The you feeling, the subject feeling, the object feeling, these are all forms of consciousness within consciousness, generated within consciousness. And each individualized soul, or core consciousness, is a matrix of potential forms built through karma, memory, desire. You say, how do you have karma if you don't have a self? Well, karma is the hallucination of the hallucinatory self. As long as you think you're a person, you will be bound by karma. Okay? Because you'll see people everywhere. But as soon as you transcend you are being a person, you'll see God everywhere. And that is the potential which localizes from non-local awareness as individual patterns or grouping of qualias through the recycling of qualia matrices, if I can say that. And the outer world of perceived phenomena, including the brain, the body, and the world, are gestalts or collections of awareness of consciousness. The subject of experience is also a qualia, and the object of experience is also a qualia, and that is basically who we are. Who are we? We are a qualia matrix, a continuum of probability clouds in a transcendent field of pure possibilities that manifests as luminous stardust with self-awareness. Because your body is that luminous stardust, which has also become self-aware. And enlightenment, the great traditions of enlightenment, are progressive stages in the evolution of that self-awareness, that we recognize that the whole universe exists in us. The path of yoga, bhakti yoga, raj yoga, Dhyan yoga, activating different parts of the brain through karma yoga, is the way to that journey. And these states of consciousness have been really mapped out in Vedanta as waking consciousness, dream consciousness, soul consciousness, cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, and unity consciousness. And today we have the technology to begin to map these out. These are the 7 most important sutras in the Vedic tradition, which shift our identity from local to non-local. Aham Brahmasmi, which says, I am the universe. Anything less than that is a compromise. Tattvamasi, I am that, you are that, that's all there is. And everything else is an expression of that. And what is that? Pure consciousness. Satchitananda, the experience of consciousness is truth, knowingness, and bliss. Sankalp, subtle intention in the field of pure consciousness, organizes its own fulfillment. Moksha, which is total freedom from the fragmented, conditioned mind. Experiencing yourself as a field of all possibilities. Shiva Shakti, the harmonious interaction of the masculine and feminine that form the elements and forces of the universe. And Ritam, which is the Sanskrit word for rhythm, the harmony of the universe. It's a symphony, and we're dancing to it, even though we can't name the tune. Okay. So these Mahavakyas lead us there. I want to stop here, show you two videos, and then invite my guests. The first video is a conversation that I had with Menas on the nature of space-time, matter, energy, and information when the Higgs boson was announced. This was in Korea. Here it is. 3 minutes. Increase the volume, please. In university, we are talking this time about the relationship between space-time, gravity, mass, and the physical universe. First of all, let's just talk about time. How do you define time in physics?
Time in physics is defined in Einstein's theory of relativity as the fourth dimension. We can visualize space, right? We can say, well, we have one dimension, depth, height, second dimension, and width, if you like, is the third dimension. And all the objects we see are three-dimensional. Time is the fourth dimension. Now, how do we experience time? In everyday life, we experience it by the passage of time, so-called passage of time, which of course basically is
change.
We keep track of change,
yeah,
right?
We keep track.
Of change. That's what it is.
So there is in the Greek mythology, there is Chronos, which is linear time, and Kairos, which is relational time. Right?
There is Chronos and Kairos, or Kairos, and Kairos is the relative, more subjective process time, so to speak. And,
how we experience it.
Which we experience, and Chronos is the linear time that physicists talk about in quantum physics and relativity. Everything.
But now we have this new nomenclature which says space-time. So space-time is basically saying that distance in space is also distance in time, right?
Yes. And in fact, in black holes, you get some weird effects. The space and time can even become intermixed at some point.
And according to relativity, if an object is moving at the speed of light, which is about 186,000 miles per second, theoretically,
yes,
then time comes to a standstill.
Time stops.
And then according to general relativity, when you get very close to a black hole or the gravitational field becomes dense, then also time slows down, and actually in the black hole itself, it stops, right?
At the boundary of the black hole, which actually is still not at the center of the black hole.
The event horizon.
The so-called event horizon. Time stops, but not for someone who is falling into the black hole. Mm-hmm. The person falling into the black hole, they would still feel the same way as any other day. The people outside, observers outside the black hole, will never see the crossing of the event horizon.
So both relativity theory and general relativity, special relativity and general relativity, yes, both suggest that actually there is no chronos. The experience of time is subjective, and in the deeper reality, which is beyond space and time, but non-locality, there's no time or space.
In fact, what seems to be the limiting of the chronos or the linear time seems to be a limiting situation where far away from highly curved space-time, like a black hole, or if you're not traveling with speeds close to the speed of light, then time appears to move linearly, and this is how we do physics. But in fact, in reality, really, if you like, everything is a process time.
Yes, but at the heart of it all, at the most fundamental level of it all, past, future, and present are all part of the fabric of space-time as a potential.
They're all part of the space-time continuum, as relativists call it, and it is, if you like, the background on which events take place. And in Einstein's theory, both in special and general relativity, he was talking about events, things happening in space and time, which get recorded by observers.
In their consciousness.
Well, presumably, of course, in their consciousness.
Okay, now let's go a little further. It's the curvature of space-time.
Yes.
Which to me is a non-visual experience.
It's definitely non-visual.
Okay, but it's a mathematical expression. Right. It's the curvature of space-time that gives rise to gravity.
Correct.
And gravity, of course, gives rise to mass.
Gravity gives rise to mass. Mass affects gravity. They are into a direct
complementarity,
one-to-one relationship.
So mass and gravity are, in a sense, inseparable. And
mass and gravity are inseparable.
And they, in turn, are the result of the curvature of space-time.
Correct. And actually, we should probably use Einstein's own words. He said that basically mass tells space how to be curved, and curved space-time tells mass how to move.
Okay.
So they're directly related.
Directly. And they're all coming from this unmanifest field, which is spaceless, dimensionless, timeless, and giving rise to the whole universe.
They presumably come from this unmanifest field, which at some point appears or manifests as what we call the space-time continuum.
And becomes the perceptual experience of objects in three-dimensional space.
Moving in space-time, doing some things, and those recordings, or when something happens, we call it an event. So basically, the theory of relativity is a situation where you have many events, they're observed by observers, and they record, and that's
in physics, what you're saying is that the physical universe comes from an invisible domain, which is pretty abstract. It's space-time, curvature of space-time, and then a field of infinite possibilities, right at the heart of it, right?
Correct.
Infinite possibilities, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, because non-locality precisely means that.
Correct. Although in the theory of relativity, non-locality doesn't really enter the picture per se, but of course in quantum theory it does enter.
Okay, so essentially we are giving a physics, cosmological, relativistic framework for how the abstract invisible becomes the concrete visible.
Correct.
And you're saying to me, at least you're suggesting, that the universe is more mind-like than machine-like.
The universe, because it doesn't really have a substance per se. The substance, according to Einstein, is nothing more than a curvature of space-time. So it's very abstract, right? It's not material. And in fact, that is one of the big problems with physics today, is that the theory of relativity and quantum theory have not been unified yet.
To me, what you've described is how the womb of creation, the cosmic mind, or God actually becomes the physical universe. Would I be exaggerating that?
It would be, again, perhaps a poetic way to put it, but actually quite accurate in many ways.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.